We got a big football game coming up on Saturday. Houston, Georgia Tech, 8 o'clock kickoff a Saturday night in Atlanta. You can watch the game on ACC Network, where our guy Wes Durham will be alongside Tim Hasselbeck and Taylor Tannenbaum down on the sideline. So we bring him in now. Hey, Wes, looking forward. We talked a few weeks ago. I didn't think we were going to get a Wes game this season. So besides the 8 o'clock kick time, this is quite exciting to have you this week.
I'm living at 8 o'clock, Brian. I don't know what's wrong with it. Come on, man.
Well, it depends, Wes. It depends if you're hosting the post-game show or not. You're done when the game's over, and then we tack on an hour and a half. But that's okay. That's neither here nor there. That's actually this is a light week for you. You got a home game, and the Falcons are on a bye week.
What a deal!
There you go.
No cross-country flight on Sunday morning from Raleigh to Phoenix, looking for the obscure direct flight. So no, it works out good. I'm glad to be doing this ball game too, because two teams looking for bowls. I don't know if you can't have a battle for the championship or something of that ilk, you look for the bowls, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's 2 5-5 teams. And, we were talking about this from a Georgia Tech perspective this week, Wes. They have Georgia next week.
Yeah.
I don't fancy their chances against Georgia next week, even though they have been good for an upset or two. So, legitimately, this is a full-on desperation situation this week for an admittedly overachieving Georgia Tech team this week.
Well, the interesting part is had they taken care of business against like Bowling Green and Boston College, it wouldn't have come to this, right? But then again, I think there's some Tech fans that might trade you Bowling Green and Boston College for the Miami win and the North Carolina win along the way. So it's kind of been, I think, from a Georgia Tech perspective, Brian, the kind of year Brent Key thought he was going to have. It was going to be up and down. There were going to be bumps. How high would the roller coaster run and how low would it go, right? And it's seen depths at both ends. And I think that makes also Saturday night pretty interesting, too, because now, based on what happened at Yankee Stadium, this is not your father's Syracuse team anymore. This is not the orange is the new fast. This is now all of a sudden kind of a throwback maybe to when Paul Johnson coached Georgia Tech. This is Wing T-ish looking, early years of Bronco Mendenhall at Virginia type stuff. So I'm as anxious to see really the ball game unfold, because I think there's a tortoise and a hare type deal here if we're not careful Saturday night too.
Yeah. Well, we've got the right guy calling the game on TV. For those that don't know, Wes was the Georgia Tech play-by-play guy before moving on to the ACC network. So, Wes, you called a bunch of those Paul Johnson triple option games. So I know it's not quite the same thing, but you must have watched the Syracuse game last week and said, "Hey, I know this. I understand what's going on here."
Well, I respect the fact that Jason Beck and Dino and their offensive staff, Brian, came up with a plan, to be honest with you. When your quarterbacks get banged up like Syracuse's have this year, you got to come up with a way to attack. And I give them a lot of credit for Bellari, number one, certainly LaQuint Allen buying in, Schrader buying in to, whatever I can do to help the team win type deal. But more than that, I think it's a more of a collaborative piece with the defensive side. The defense has to understand this is what the goal is this week, and this is our method. And once I think it sounds like they got that buy-in all the way, then I don't see any reason they can't pull it off again, because they create tempo in the game in a different way. And then the second part of it is you're talented enough on defense to win a lot of football games. And I give Dino a lot of credit in 8 years there, Brian. He's changed gears a lot offensively from what he started with to then kind of the middle of the road to now doing this out of, I don't want to say desperation, but necessity, certainly. I think from an injury perspective, I give him a ton of credit for finding ways to win. And look, Pitt's broken, Brian, in some respect, and I don't know why. It's been the most mysterious team for me in the ACC this year. And again, Syracuse deserves all the credit for finding a way to win the ball game last Saturday in New York for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's the worst Pitt team in at least 25 years. It's perplexing. I get they had quarterback issues, but man, they've had quarterback issues before and been just fine. This one came out of nowhere. But I'm intrigued on your perspective on this, because again, you did see it week in and week out with Georgia Tech. So Pitt had to be taken off guard by what Syracuse did last week. Like, whatever Syracuse does this week, my assumption is it's going to resemble more last week than any of the previous weeks. How does this change now that, Georgia Tech is aware that this is coming at them this week?
Well, I think you have to also take into perspective that Georgia Tech made a coordinator change midway through the season, too. Don't forget that. They brought Kevin Shear from just coaching linebackers to being the full-time defensive coordinator. and demoted Andrew Thacker from that position. And that was after the Bowling Green game before they played Miami. And what Kevin Shearer did, he has adopted much more of a 4-2-5. Well, if you run 4-2-5 against what I consider, spread option football, like what Paul Johnson did, everybody has to play and everybody has to play their assignment. And usually, Rocky Long is a 3-3-5 genius. We all know that, right? And what 4-2-5 does, it then creates a scenario where there has to be a dedicated safety down in the box. It used to be called in the early 2000s, Brian, the big nickel. The big nickel was a hybrid safety, fifth defensive back. Well, now that person has got to be more linebacker than safety, right? And I think that's the challenge for Georgia Tech, because personnel-wise, if they believe Syracuse is going to do this, they have to kind of break some of their rules that they've installed under Kevin Shearer in the last 4 or 5 ball games and reset the rules. And I think that's a tough ask here. So how does Georgia Tech counter it? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a fifth defensive lineman on Saturday. I think that's the easiest way to do it, play it straight up. However, Paul Johnson might say, look, I saw everything. And Brent Key and Paul Johnson have had conversations in the past, so I'm guessing that they've had a phone call at some point this week just to say, hey, look, am I on the right path? And Kevin Shearer and Brent Key and their defensive staff, which also features Marco Coleman, who is a talented defensive lineman, as everybody knows, in the league for a long time, it's going to be really interesting. But I think the secret coach on the staff for Georgia Tech this week is Travaris Tillman, who coaches the defensive backs. He was an in-the-box safety at Georgia Tech who played free safety in the NFL, and he's the kind of guy who understands pursuit angles in the run game. It was why he stayed in the league as long as he did, Brian. And I think he's going to be a big factor in what the instruction is for the defensive game plan against Syracuse on Saturday night. But let me also add real quick, what wrinkles have they added this week? Because when you got to do it last week, it's one thing. But now you've gotten it, you understand it, there's a bit of a buy-in. So Dan Villari was a high school quarterback in Massapequa. I'm sure he can throw the football. I'm curious as to see if there's an option wrinkle to this, if there's a veer wrinkle, a midline veer type operation, and then when do they throw it and who do they throw it to in the course of the ball game?
Yeah, I mean, we saw last week, Wes, and that's actually what I was going to ask you about here. Like, I mean, Garrett Schrader completed his first pass of the game. It was a touchdown, but it could have been a shot put. Like, you could tell he was in clear discomfort, and that it was a 5-yard touchdown. He did not have a 6-yard touchdown in his arsenal last week, if it came down to it. Villari let a couple loose down the field. They were inaccurate. Who knows if he can get one. Comparing it back to those Georgia Tech teams that you had back then, it was run. But when there was a pass, right, very often, the Demaryius Thomas years and stuff like that, it was over the top. It wasn't a 5-yard game. It was 30 yards down the field. Right. So it feels like generally, right, when you're running an offense somewhat like this, that kind of has to be the counter. You just get somebody open deep and they just forget about him over the top.
Well, and that's the way you have to be disciplined if you're the defensive unit. And working with Paul Johnson those years at Georgia Tech, Brian, I can tell you that, and by the way, you remember the last Syracuse team to come to Atlanta. Scott Schaefer.
I choose not to remember that game, Wes.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah, it was not fun.
Scott Schaefer brought a pretty good defense in, and they got shredded, right? And in Paul Johnson's words, they lined up the wrong way. And if you line up the wrong way, and Brent Key knows this because he's an alum and he knows how Paul Johnson's career worked. If you line up the wrong way, it's going to be a long night. But I think the thing I mentioned earlier, the tortoise and the hare thing, is interesting here because Georgia Tech, an offense that is far, far away now from what Paul Johnson ran, Georgia Tech relies on explosives, Brian. Haynes King is a very capable quarterback in this league. It's going to be, and Rocky Long told us today, that's the fastest team Syracuse has played this year, which I find fascinating. But on the perimeter, they have speed. So how will Georgia Tech counter the gears that Syracuse wants to scrimmage in on Saturday night? I don't know. I think that's part of our storyline as we open up the show, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 56-0 for those scoring at home back in 2013. And incidentally, if you just happen to be standing on the sideline the whole game, it was played in a light drizzle, just to keep it more interesting the whole time. It was
sound like a first-hand account.
I don't know. Just hypothetically, some of us may have been standing down there, and some of the rest of us might have been inside upstairs. Just hypothetically.
Can I share you a quick story? Post of that.
Absolutely.
Like 2 weeks later, as you realize, you remember this, of course, I had a lot of Syracuse games, my first couple of years into TV. In fact, I think I got a Texas Bowl T-shirt because of the.
You were, I think, if I'm remembering right, you were 5-0
I
that
was,
year
yes.
for Syracuse.
Yes, I was. But Shafe came back from losing in Atlanta, and we were in our production meeting. He looked at me. He said, "Why didn't you tell me it was going to be like that?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you worked there long enough. You know how." He goes, "You got a basic concept of what we do." He said, "We lined up entirely the wrong way." I said, "Yep, you did." And he goes, "Well, I should have asked you what I was going to do to see if that was going to be effective." I said, "Shafe, I don't know enough about defensive football to know whether you're going to be able to do it or not. That guy over there is really smart. He knows what his offense is." So Shafe's like, "Why didn't you tell me?" I'm like, "What do you mean tell you? I have no idea." So.
Gotta love Shafe.
Oh,
Gotta love
unbelievable.
Shafe. He's a great guy back in the days. We got Wes Durham with us, ACC Network. We're talking Cuse and Georgia Tech on Saturday night. And you mentioned the Georgia Tech offense. For those that look at these things, I think the point total in this game is like 53 and a half right now. So Vegas is expecting some offense here. And a lot of that, right, is the Georgia Tech side. Like this, I don't want to say unexpected, but Texas A&M fans, that's where Hayes King came from. That they wouldn't have predicted this out of this guy this year. This is I think the most shocking thing in the league this year. What Georgia Tech has been able to do on offense.
Brian, I think it's interesting because Buster Faulkner came over as an offensive analyst from Kirby Smart's staff at Georgia, and I don't think you could have found 100 fans that would have recognized who Buster Faulkner was, except those that remember him playing high school football with Jeff Francoeur at Parkview High School in Lilburn. To me, Buster is a guy who came in, looked at the personnel, and assessed the plan. And what they're doing is really quite interesting from a multiplicity standpoint. They line up mostly in the gun, as you know, a lot of pistol. But what they do is they delegate tight ends and receivers to be interchangeable sometimes in their patterns. And I think that's a curious part of what he does. And then the other thing is they have found more guys as wide receivers and converted them to running back. And that's what Jamal Haynes is. And the interesting part for me is there's only one Paul Johnson recruit left on this football team, and it's Dante Smith, the running back, who went crazy in the second half against Carolina. The real work in the offseason is going to have to be defensively. They've not been good on defense. And I think it bothers Brent a lot, but at the same time, what they've done offensively has been a real surprise. And I will tell you that the young freshman wide receiver, Eric Singleton Jr., is a talented guy. 10-200 guy who can make plays with the football. He's not just a sprinter. He's a pass catcher. And I think there's a difference. And it's going to be interesting to see. He impacted the Carolina game when they won. He caught 5 touchdowns in their first 5 games. I think he's a challenge for anybody, but it sounds like Syracuse is well aware of what he will be on Saturday night.
Yes, I would think they'd be quite prepared for that. You said you talked to Rocky Long today.
Yeah.
Nothing like that's gonna slip past old Rocky. So I think it's gonna be a fascinating game to watch on Saturday, directly because of what Syracuse did last week to completely change it up.
Yeah.
At this late date. Wes Durham is with us. Wes, let's back out on the league a little bit to 30,000 feet. Is this from a league perspective? And I don't just mean like the league office. I mean probably everybody not named Louisville right now. Like, does everyone need Florida State to win out? Like, does the league need Florida State in the playoff this year just to get back in the mix on the national scene?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You want Florida State in the CFP Final Four. There's no question if you're the ACC. This league's had a really good year, Brian, but you got to validate it at the end, right? I mean, you got to find a way to get a team in there, and Florida State's the principal candidate. Had Louisville managed to stay undefeated, we'd have a hell of a show on our hands, wouldn't we? And I think that what Florida State has done is a real testament to Mike Norvell understanding exactly what the patience factor was going to be and how long the rebuild was going to be. I didn't do a game his first year. I did the Jacksonville State game the second year where they lost on the Hail Mary. So I've seen the bottom of the curve, and I never doubted the guy's ability to get it done at all. Now they beat LSU to start a year ago, and a lot of people were surprised. But look at the momentum they captured about halfway last year and continued to ride it out, right? And I think that's a huge credit to Mike and the staff that he's put together. I think Adam Fuller's a terrific defensive coordinator, and he managed the landscape well. Florida State got, they went aggressive in the portal, and he found the right guys to contribute. So on the whole, the ACC needs Florida State to get in that Final Four for sure.
And yeah, as much as they're saber rattling and the whole thing about maybe not wanting to be around for the long term, that it's funny how it all goes. Funny how it all goes. All right, Wes. Before we let you go, I mean, we're still buzzing about the Orange Hoops comeback last night against Colgate. I know you'll be diving into the hoops sooner than later.
Yeah.
You got any early thoughts on the hoops season?
Well, I've had a couple games already. I've seen Carolina in person. Saw Pitt night before last. I would offer you this. I worry about Louisville, Notre Dame, and Georgia Tech. And after that, I think everybody else is capable. But 5 losses to teams outside the top 100 in the RPI this early in the first, 10 days of the regular season, Brian, does concern me. Now, granted, Georgia Tech losing to UMass Lowell wasn't on my card last night, but it happened. But I am optimistic about this league. That's a terrific win for Red to show kind of where his team is through a couple games. I think the ACC SEC Challenge is going to be fascinating when we play that week after Thanksgiving. But on the whole, I'm optimistic that this league can get 5 or 6 in the tournament for sure.
Yeah, obviously those early season losses, that's what held the whole league back last year. So those need to be limited starting now going forward. Syracuse will be hosting LSU in that ACC SEC inaugural challenge. That is 2 weeks from yesterday. LSU will be up here in the Dome. The minor matter of playing the whole freaking top 10 out in Maui before that. But we'll get to that.
That is an unbelievable challenge, isn't it?
Have you ever seen a preseason tournament as stacked as that one? I can't recall one that's has a lineup. Like
Maui has celebrated like anniversaries with unbelievable fields of past champions, and I think they've had. But then again, when they celebrate those anniversaries, they throw Chaminade in there to take a beating for 3 games. But no, the Maui field this year is incredible. I mean, it's, if anything, the strength of schedule out of there is going to be lights out. But look, I like the Mintz and Starling stuff. Look like it's working. You tell me better. I mean, I haven't been able to sit and watch at length, but I'm looking at box scores. Chris Bell obviously had a big ball game last night. It feels like McLeod has come in and done what he needs to do. Nobody wants him to score, but they want him to impact shots and get rebounds. So, I don't hate what I've seen so far out of Coach Autry's first team.
Yeah, Judah and JJ, they're going to be a problem for the league. Judah especially, he's the real deal. Yeah. The best I can describe it, Wes, since you haven't seen it, like you saw him last year, he's even more of what he was last year. He's even more Judah than he was, getting to the rim and to contact and the whole thing. All right, last thing before we let you go, one Falcons question. How's our guy Bergeron doing? How's Matthew?
It has been highs and lows. It's been feast or famine. He's had a PhD in O-line play, if you want to know the truth. But he has gotten better. You think about the guys he's seen in the first 10 games, O'Brien. I mean, he has seen some football players now. And he's not gotten into division play quite yet. I mean, they've played 2 division games, week 1 against Carolina at home, and then 3 weeks ago they were in Tampa, and both games they won. But every week he lines up against the guy who is they're no rookies, in other words. I mean, he's seen Aleem McNeil from NC State, who I'm sure he swapped blows with in the Atlantic Division back in the forlorn days of ACC football. But I think he's doing very, very well. I am incredibly happy for him. He's been an asset to the team. I mean, what an interesting guy, as to talk to. Fascinating kid. And he's fit in well. And I also think that playing alongside Jake Matthews, who's got 50-some starts now in a row in the National Football League, has also rubbed off on him a touch or two as well.
All right, good to hear he's hanging in there. I think he's going to be a good pro in the long term, but we shall see. We shall see. Good people, man.
He is.
All right, Wes, always good to chat. We'll be watching Saturday night, and hopefully you get something fun to call with the Houston, Georgia team.
Thanks, Brian. Be well.
All right, always good to chat with our guy Wes Durham from ACC Network. It'll be him. It'll be Tim Hasselbeck, Taylor Tannenbaum down on the sideline as Syracuse and Georgia Tech in the penultimate regular season game of this year. Winner will be bowl eligible. 8:00 kick on Saturday evening in Atlanta, and I'll be with you whenever it ends. The 8 o'clocks, they end a little later, so post game 11:30ish. I don't know. We'll be here. We'll be rocking it out. Phone lines will be open, as per always, on Saturday night. When we come back, the phone lines will be open at 315-437-7644. And this hour brought to you by William Mattar. Hurt in a car. Call Willie Matar. Back to wrap up our opening hour after this. It's QSportsTalk.com and ESPN Radio.